Dear colleagues and all of you who follow us online, today is a very difficult day for me because of the loss of Lt.Gen. Pecos Kutesa, who I had known for more than 42 years. Early this week I was driving to Western Uganda for a meeting at the farm, and about 8:30 when I got to the metallic road barriers at Katonga Bridge, all memories about this fine gentleman and officer came to me. The sun was still up in the east rising, and I thought, should I stop and take a salute here, just in memory of this man? But I knew that the people I had in the car and the peasants who were crossing at that time had no idea what was happening. Why Katonga? Many of you who are young may not remember this very powerful example. A small group of young people in 1981 take to war and they make Luwelo their base. Under intense pressure, they build both military and political strength. And by the beginning of 1984, they take what I would think in the military terms is a pincer movement. They leave a portion in Luwelo, they go to Western Uganda, they take the town of Kabalore, they cross through Kamwenge, they end up in Sembabule, they get to Masaka, and they siege Masaka from August of 1985 to December. Now, Pecos Kutesa was among the leaders, a battalion commander, a very fearless fighter, and he was the fellow who stopped the crossing at Katonga Bridge. When you held Katonga, it meant that nothing from Kampala would cross to the west, and anything from the west going into Kampala would be assessed knowing the danger, it's war going on. But Pecos was the fellow who led the Battle of Katonga, who held on to it for a long time. That's the reason I just remembered that memory early this week at that bridge. But I have known Pecos for the last 42 years. The first time I saw him was early, should I say maybe end of 1978. I think I was a 9-year-old boy, and Pecos comes home. His father and my father had been colleagues in the East African Christian Revival movement. They had dropped clans and tribes and everything, and they were calling each other Owo-Luganda. They were Banyankole who spoke Luganda very well. And they were not just Banyankole, they were Christians. They were strong in faith, our parents. So Pecos, I didn't know he wasn't even my relative until much later when I found out there was no clan relationship. It was just simply the unity we had as people from same Christian background. Pecos comes home. I'm a young kid and he's a young child, and this is a lanky, light-skinned fellow with a mop of hair, and he is very fast at everything he touches. And he's trying to prove to all of us that he's a karateka, that he had done karate, yet he had just finished senior 6. So he would put his hands in ash that still had smoldering fire, and he pulls it out and he shows that he's a strong fellow, and he goes punching banana stems, but all along he's holding a novel, James Hadley Chase, in his armpit. I just couldn't understand. He's reading, he's punching, he's milking cows, he's so fast on his feet. As a young boy, I was extremely enamored, like this must be a very unique person. James Hadley Chase novels are novels about how to catch spies, money, relationships. That's what he was reading. I think he must have been 19 or 20 years old. The next time I met Pecos was 1987. I was now 19 myself, going to high school, and he was a colonel in the army. I think he was the division commander for the 4th Division in Gulu. I came to see him simply to help me find a vacancy in high school. And he didn't see me. He sent me a pointed message. I won't see you. There were no phones at that time. You would have to send someone. I won't see you, although I know everything about you. Let your grades decide which school you go to. When I look back, powerful example. Stand on your own. Relatives, clanism, useless. Let your brain and your God help you navigate the world. I went away. I wasn't upset. As I got to understand later, this is who Pecos was. In 1994, I saw him again. This time, he had removed the military uniform. He had run in a constituency called Kabura. He had won as a Constituent Assembly delegate. I was in the Constituent Assembly now as a reporter after university. Again, he would go after issues with no gloves. Principled, even though he came from this military background, he took principled actions in the debate in the Constituent Assembly. The last time I worked with Pecos was January 2020 in the trek from Galamba here in Luero all the way to Kakumiro in Birembo. Together, every day, trying to walk. I have fond memories of, I would walk backwards on the column, find him seated down, give him water, chat about the war and how it was. It's a very sad moment that he died in India. I wasn't there, but I was on phone with his family, especially Afande Dora, who is his wife, who they met in the bush, who is our family friend. It's a sad day, but I want to just say 3 things about this man that may help the young generation perhaps understand that it's not how long we live, it is the impact we have in the short life. Because Pecos was 65. 65 is not old. There are people becoming cabinet ministers and heads of states and leaders of corporations and enterprises at 70 and above. Pecos had more fight in his belly in another field he was now engaged in, not on the battlefield of the military. But there are 3 things that I learned from him that I want to share with you. The first one is that he was an extreme military strategist of our time. I had so many conversations with him in the early 2000s and later, and he would speak to me about this very powerful example of the infantry. Infantry are people holding rifles, fighting, walking. For those of you who have no military background like me, he would demonstrate the power of an infantryman holding an AK-47, disabling an artilleryman who has a huge weapon placed on top of a hill, able to decimate the population or anything below him. But this infantryman walking up to this man, sneaking behind him and pointing a pistol, he disables the whole infantry. So he would basically be saying, it's not really how strong you are. It's not the weapons you carry. It's how smart, how strategic you are in terms of the objective. He reminds me of the day, I think it's August 28th, the year is 1799, and Napoleon Bonaparte is just a captain, and he comes to this little knoll, little hill, and they are pushing artillery pieces on this hill, and his commander says, you cannot stop the Spanish and British Armada. They have taken the city of Toulon. There's nothing you can do. You need to bring in more reinforcements of men. And Napoleon says, no, I've taken the contours of the hill where we are and the supply lines of the British and the Spanish. Give me 2 days and you will see. He positioned his artillery pieces at an intersection on that day that was bringing supplies to the British Army, and the British Army vacated Toulon without firing a bullet. Strategy, more important than strength. When you know what to do, that's what Pecos really taught me. When you know what to do, it doesn't matter how much money you have on you, no matter how many people support you, stay the course. He also spoke to me about, in the bush, how they would use camouflage as a way to multiply their strength. He would speak about the effective use of swamps and river crossings as, for lack of a better word, killing grounds of the enemy. The NRA are few, the other people are many more, they have more equipment, but they blend in with the environment, they close these river crossings, and they multiply their strength. And he used to ask me a question about he said, when we came fighting on 24th and 25th of January, attacking Kampala from Mpigi, so they are advancing from the Katonga Bridge, and they are attacking Kampala, and they get to Busega. And they were expecting the swamp we call Rubiji today to be either heavily mined or to find the forces of UNLA that would be defending Kampala. He said, how could they miss Rubiji? Because if they took Rubiji, it meant that we would never cross to Busega. It meant we would never cross to Rubaga. It meant we would never cross to the side of Bombo. They would have held us there for a week. But that they did notice the strategic value of Rubiji, that became our strength, although we were small. These are lessons running in my mind as I remember Pecos. This is one area. No wonder he became the head of doctrine and the head of ideology in the army. This young army needed people who thought like Afande Pecos. This is lesson number one. Lesson number two is that for me, Pecos remained the expression of a generation that faced war when they were young, participated in war, and the war had an effect on them, but they never got counseling sessions from a country that has few psychiatrists, from a country that takes, if someone is not okay in the head, they say, oh, oyo bwabera bwatyo, because there are no facilities to treat people. Uganda has only 30 psychiatrists. And I just want to tell you one of the stories that Pecos told me, and it left an impression on me, but the way he told it to me was, it's normal. And in my mind, I kept thinking, no, this is not normal. You must know that this has an effect on the subconsciousness of a person. It has an effect on the way they see the world. So I think the year is 1982. The battle is at a place called Kalongero Bridge. We walked in all these places in January of 2020 before the lockdowns of March last year. And they've been fighting, and he has two colleagues. One is called Mondo Tumheiwe, who died in the bush. Mondo is the father of a big man who says he's a pastor called Mondo Mugisha. This is his father. And he has another fellow called Frank Guma. We knew him as Captain Frank Guma. He also died in the 90s. These are two of his colleagues, and they are heavily engaged in this battle. And suddenly, Pecos turns around and he sees these two of his colleagues carrying a headless body of a colleague he knew by name, had lived, ate together, fought, and he sees the wriggling of the rest of the body with no head. And he continues doing what he's doing, and they continue firing. When the battle ends, they cover this headless body and they bury the body. And he doesn't get the feeling until later in the night. He says he starts shivering, remembering a colleague he had been having a conversation with, and suddenly seeing a headless body. These stories, and even many more, he tells me, he was very cheeky, how on January 20th in 1984 they attacked Masindi early in the morning, they overran the town, and they even attempted to hold a rally in Masindi. But by 11, the soldiers who were victorious are stung by bees, and bees chased them out of town. And he says, how could we defeat an army and we could not defeat bees? Very funny person he was. Now, in my opinion, a country that has few psychiatrists, people who would help a generation that had gone through war, sort of missed people like Pecos to really decompress them, listen to them, take these stories and use them as stories to stop. Never again should we have a war as a country. And I even keep thinking, why is it that almost all the people who have been fighting to become presidents, a significant number are ex-NRA. You look at Kano Besigye, you look at General Muntu, you look at General Tumukunde, you look at General Biraro the late. I can go on and on. It is perhaps because of what they saw, and it was never drilled out of them, and therefore they think that something will happen and they must stop it, or they do not feel appreciated. This society does not remember their example in such a significant way that we have a way to have a conversation about how countries are built and how to stop future wars by listening to these powerful stories. And therefore, for me, that was lesson number 2 from Pecos. And he told me this story I've shared with you while reading a book, operating a computer, and smoking a cigarette. And he's talking about a headless body. And I'm just thinking, look at all these things he's doing, multitasking, but at the same time telling me a very horror story. And he's telling it to me like normal. In a normal society, that's not normal. But this is the normal that generation bled for, to ensure that maybe the next generation will never see or know this. And it's the same for people who have fought and re-established the nations worldwide. Lesson number 3 is that Pecos stood at a very tangential point between transformation on one hand and continuity on another. Transformation because when he ended the war, when the war ended, he removed his military uniform. He went back to school and graduated. He went, put the gun down, and went into a constituent assembly to write the chapter for the next level. And even more importantly, before he died, 2 years ago, our conversation was about how do you grow more coffee, and you make coffee your new battleground for the wealth of this nation. Very powerful, transformational on one side, but continuity on the other. And what was continuity from Pecos' life? He lived values that I so highly respect. First, patriotism, that you do a thing you have to do when you have to do it for a country and move on and go and do another thing that you have to do for the next generation to stand on. Extremely powerful, extremely symbolic to our generation. He told me something else. In the bush, 3 a.m., they are up and they sit around fire and there's a lecture and they call it Kipindi Kya Utamaduni. And he says, we were doing this early morning in the bush, but I can tell you, I remember I learned this from my parents because they would wake up early to pray and to sing and to thank God. So I took the values I found with my parents, with Christianity, I took them to the army. Continuity combined with transformation. Another powerful thing I respect Afande Pecos for. Afande Pecos and Afande Dora met in the bush. They had children in the bush. One of the children was born, like today. In the evening, the camp was attacked. The child was taken by a soldier. They didn't know if the child is alive and was taken to the child's aunt. Very strange stories he would tell me. But they kept together through thick and thin. And now Dora is burying her husband from the bush. You want to tell me that there was no temptation, attractiveness, now that we are in power, let's find more women? No. Pecos stayed in marriage, stayed with the values that we require to strengthen families. And for that, and Dora, I can only thank God for them. So how do we remember Pecos? Extremely important. Selfless, a very brisk man at everything he did, lived very light, and had a very transcendent spirit. Transcendent spirit, sometimes Pecos would be too deep for me to understand. He would say, he would compare the act of making war as the act of making love. I said, how those two things are different. How do you say that? He said, no, these two things are connected in our subconsciousness. What makes a soldier exhilarated to fight and not know he could die is almost the same that exhilarates a man in love to stick with a woman and they enjoy each other. So how can you combine war with? He said, well, that's life. This is for someone who dropped out of senior 6, and he's talking about deep intellectual, ideological, psychological stuff. So his mind was over matter, over material, over small things, to the bigger things of life, to the bigger things of nation. And for that, I can never forget him. He was also concerned about a stable, growing country. And and its youthful population, and what those young people see and think. He would be concerned about, how do they see me? If I take on the road and I'm pushing everybody off the road and I have a kadeng, instead of keeping time and go for a meeting, I give a wrong picture to the army. I have heard General Kodeta say the same people with same values. He was concerned about the image and impression, but more importantly, what the young people should think. Now, I pray that he lives in our collective memory, and we continue to see his contribution, and he leaves us with one question. What's your contribution as a young person? May the Lord give the spirit of Afande Pecos all the best of rest, and his family peace in this season.